very much everyone for joining. It's Friday. I hope you're still full of energy. I hope you've had a great week. So our speaker today is a motivational speaker, high performance coach and leading fitness figure in the UK, a former advertising professional turned award-winning entrepreneur and now adventurer. She was one of the first ever women to participate in Channel 4's SAS Who Dares Wins, reaching the final stages after 11 days in extreme conditions at an altitude of 3,000 feet in Chile. In 2021, she and two other women, the Girls Who Dare, set a new world record rowing unaided across the Pacific Ocean. It took 60 days, 17 hours and 6 minutes. She has undertaken ultramarathons in the Arctic and across the savannas of Kenya, so covering distances of over 250 kilometres in temperatures of minus 35 degrees and plus 50, carrying everything she needed to survive. She is currently planning to participate in a race across America in 2024. That's a 3,000-mile cycle race through 17 states in just 7 days. She's going to talk about her experiences, the physical, mental and emotional impact they have had and what she has learned about resilience, self-care, dealing with extreme pressure and difficult relationships with others along the way. So get ready to step into your own fears, be inspired to unlock your human potential and discover the secret 60% that we all have in us and be inspired to live life in a way you never thought possible. So, Vicki Anstey, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. What a great event. Thank you for the warm welcome, Michelle. I'm going to start by reading you a letter. And it says, "Dear Vicki, I wonder what time of the day or night it is as you read this. It must feel so disorientating. I'm lying in bed at 6:30 a.m. listening to the sound of pigeons cooing. And it's all very well living a comfortable suburban life, but it would be nothing without my memories of adventures across the seas. You're living that now, creating rich memories that you can look back on, and they would be nothing without the hardships, and most importantly, how you chose to face them. Before I left on my ocean row, I asked friends and family if they would write me letters that I could take with me and open. And without realizing it, they became a kind of lifeline to me. They were reminders from the people who knew me the best when I needed them the most, that we could do what we'd set out to achieve. And this letter was from my friend Debs, who was a former competitive rower and a sailor, so she knew all too well the types of conditions that I would be exposed to out there in the middle of the Pacific. But as a clinical psychologist, she also had some pretty accurate insights into the human behaviours and emotions that I was likely to bear witness to and experience. And some of her letters, weirdly, were like mirrors to the appalling events and difficult emotions that unfolded. I want to talk to you today, not just about embracing and performing under pressure, but thriving under pressure. And pressure that comes from the kinds of challenges that we all face in life, whether they're big and extreme or seemingly quite small and insignificant. I want to show you the huge untapped potential that we all have within us and show you how self-reliance can be a means to becoming our authentic selves, orientating our lives the way we want them and making a home within our own skin. I want to show you the power of emotional endurance, and how we can use that to navigate difficult relationships with other people. And I want to explain to you that fear is really just opportunity in disguise. But first, I need to reassure you that I'm not some kind of born athlete or adventure seeker. I started out in advertising and marketing, and I would truly be the last person that you would expect to get a world record for anything physical. Even now, I'm not the strongest, the fastest, the fittest, or the most talented in any regard, and I can still be completely consumed by self-doubt. And when it came to the row as just one example of that, it wasn't only the enormity of the challenge that presented itself. I actually have a lifelong profound fear of open water, stemming from a near drowning incident when I was a child. I only learned how to front crawl in the last few weeks before the race, and I remained completely terrified at the prospect of being in the water thousands of miles away from land. And growing up, my mother had shown me what I felt to be a lifetime of disappointment that I just didn't fit into her mould of the ideal daughter. And I craved the kind of unconditional approval and understanding that she so determinedly showed my sister. Perhaps typically then, I went on to spend 20 years of my life in a very limiting relationship, a marriage that showed me that I was not a very capable person and that I would be nothing on my own. Ultimately, I allowed other people to write the label by which I would be defined, and with no strong female role models in my life, I stayed right in my lane and lived up to that narrative. So what I'm trying to show you is that I'm no superhero. We may have a lot more in common than you think. I have the same insecurities as anyone. I've only really recently found my true path in life. I know what it is to feel inadequate, to feel fear, and to feel the need to conform and comply to other people's and society's expectations and requirements. But I'm also a bit of a rebel at heart, and following 10 years of a successful career in advertising, as much to my own surprise as anyone else's, I turned my life around and from being quite unfit and burnt out, became a pioneer of all things in the fitness industry. And I set up and ran my own successful and award-winning business. But I believed my husband when he maintained that he really ran the show and that I didn't know what I was doing. I was a baffling paradox, because sometimes you can appear to be thriving on the outside, but on the inside, your emotional vulnerability tells a very different story. And I let my husband control every aspect of my life and my business. He didn't even think I was capable of having my own bank account. So I'd spent my whole life really in this sort of ecosystem of unsupportive behaviour, always holding out for the approval of others to achieve my true potential. And in the process, I'd completely eroded my ability to trust my instincts, to make sometimes simple, small decisions, and to believe in my power. But I was physically capable. And by the age of 40, I trained day in, day out for over 15 years. And not just out of the necessity for running a successful fitness business, but as a kind of coping mechanism as well for the emotional turmoil that I found myself in. And as my physical strength improved, I started to notice that my emotional and mental resilience also increased. Quite simply, I'd found new edges from which to grow. And so finally, in the approach to my 40th birthday, I reached a kind of tipping point, I suppose, a point of no return where I realised that I'd had enough and that I had the right to decide what the rest of my life should look like. And so I left. And it was the best decision that I ever made, the catalyst for so many changes in my life. And amidst all the chaos and the stress and the fear, the anxiety of leaving my marriage, everything that I'd known since I was 19 years old, I'd started to trust my instincts, and I knew that I was on a path towards a future version of myself that at that time I didn't even know existed. And only a few months later, very much encouraged by friends who I guess saw more in my potential than I did at that time, I applied to participate as one of the first females in Channel 4's SAS Who Dares Wins, which if you've seen it, you may know is one of the biggest tests of performance against adversity. So I was a 40-year-old woman in the midst of a tumultuous divorce with a fear of heights, a fear of water, who had to forward abseil down 200-foot cliff faces and submerge herself in ice holes high up in the frozen lakes of the Andes. And I was competing head-to-head with 24 other male and female recruits, some of whom were 20 years younger than me. And we were all forced to undertake some of the most punishing mental and physical tasks imaginable. And I'm just going to show you a short clip of that experience.
Recruit to undertake the ice drill is number 17, Vicki, who now has to face her ultimate fear.
Right, when you're ready, submerge yourself, make your way to the second ice hole.
I think you can waste a lot of mental energy thinking about others and comparing yourself to others. I'm thinking, how will I do my best? How will I compete against me and the demons in my head?
Up. Chill out, chill out. What is the number on the helicopter you flew in on?
20 stuff.
Look at me. Okay, breathe normally. Breathe normally. In your own time, when you're ready, make your way to the third ice hole.
I guess it's just the total loss of control. You have to put your whole faith in a completely unknown experience and a completely unknown outcome.
Move, let's move, let's move. Roll around to dry yourself off. Move that body. Get that fucking blood circulating. Quick as you can.
It took me a while to overcome fear, to really grasp how my fear worked, what my coping mechanism was.
So conquering your own fears and putting your faith in completely unknown outcomes, these things became sort of mantras to me. And in SAS training, you get no positive reinforcement whatsoever. You genuinely don't know if you're sinking or swimming. You're known by just a number. So you learn to trust the power of your mind. You learn to trust the process. And you learn to trust yourself. And reaching the final stages of that program, getting through 11 days of brutal physical and mental interrogation, finally allowed me to believe in my power. This was my time to realize that my self-belief could be a match for my physical capabilities. And never before had I faced so many fears, put my faith so completely in the unknown and walked willingly into pressure. And it taught me so much, not least about the role of self-discipline, and that getting really good at the most boring, mundane tasks is what sets all elite athletes and military personnel apart. It's developing that resilience to find a way forward, time and time again. And let me tell you a secret. Nothing ever really stays the same. If you hold on for long enough, it will change. After SAS, I met someone who asked me if I would like to row an ocean. And I knew physical endurance, I knew mental endurance, but the row taught me a whole new kind of endurance, emotional endurance. And rowing really was the easy part. And getting to the start line of that race was the single most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. And just a few months after securing enough funds, £70,000 to cover the costs of our row, and just a couple of days after spending an entire weekend packing up all of our kit and equipment and supplies ready for the boat to be shipped to San Francisco, we learned that the 2020 Great Pacific Race was in jeopardy due to the emerging COVID pandemic. And sometime later, we sat on a Zoom call and learnt that the race organisers had in fact cancelled the event. We sat there with tears pouring down our cheeks, mouths gaping wide open in utter disbelief and bewilderment. All of that hard work had been seemingly for nothing because my two crewmates were not able to defer their places to the following year. And as the most inexperienced of all three of us by a considerable way, I couldn't conceive of how I could continue without them. But I couldn't give up either because that isn't in my DNA, and so many people were involved at that stage, too many to let down. So I made a phone call. I called a guy named Chris Martin, Not the lead singer of Coldplay, although that would be a terrific story. But the guy that we were leasing our boat from, and as it happened, one of the first ever men to row across the Pacific Ocean. And I said to him that if he would allow me to hold on to the boat for another year, I would find new crew and we would row under the Golden Gate Bridge in 2021. And of course, as soon as I said it out loud, there was no going back. Thank God he believed in me. And miraculously, I did eventually find my 2 new crewmates. One of them was a girl named Jane who'd been in the British Army and played rugby for England. She was intimidatingly impressive. And contenders for the 3rd spot came and went when they realised quite how much commitment was involved, until finally, with just a few months to go, one of Jane's friends, a girl named Orla, said that she would step in and join us. It seemed almost irrelevant at that point that we lived in different countries. I was in England, Jane was in Wales, Orla lived in Dubai. Because of the COVID restrictions on travel, we couldn't meet up even if we wanted to. And we were also completely novice rowers, aptly named Girls Who Dare. So imagine, in addition to 3 full-time jobs, having to learn all of the skills and gain all the knowledge required for participation in a race like that. We had to learn chart navigation, understand weather patterns. We had to become competent crew members with sea survival skills and understand first aid at sea. We had to rack up over 100 hours of practice time on the water, all through the different lockdowns of 2020 and 2021. And even the gyms were closed, so we were training in our living rooms. And although we tried to get to know each other on Zoom, it wasn't until we all arrived in San Francisco at the start line of that race that I met Orla for the first time, and all 3 of us were finally together. And we arrived to discover that a number of items had been stolen from our boat in the dockyard. It really wasn't the kickoff that we'd hoped for, but we duly set about replacing those items and preparing ourselves in the boat for the final race inspection in those last few days. Dealing with the uncharted emotions that inevitably built up was regrettably the last thing on our minds. So perhaps you're wondering what on earth happened on that row once we finally set off under the Golden Gate Bridge towards Hawaii. Well, within hours, we were caught up in the choppy swell of the Pacific Ridge, and in the days and weeks that followed, the seasickness grew in intensity. We spent over 100 hours locked in our tiny, damp 6-by-3-foot cabin during violent storms. We spent over 15 days more at sea than we'd anticipated. But we kept going with our rowing shift patterns, rowing 3 hours on and 3 hours off, sometimes 4 hours on and just 2 hours off. And we diligently desalinated seawater, ocean water for drinking, and rehydrated our food for eating. And in case you're wondering, because you all will be wondering, we used a bucket as a toilet. And we tended to the sores on our hands and our bottoms. I was unable to keep a single meal down for 23 days. And I lost 25% of my body weight. Between us, we lost 35 kilos. But it wasn't the sores or the physical decline or even the sleep deprivation or seasickness that were the biggest threat to our success. It was the fragility of our team dynamics. Underlying tensions that led to frequent disagreement, assumption, feelings of insecurity and isolation in what was an already very hostile environment. And we functioned as a team to a point. We shared a steely determination and a very competitive spirit. And when we learnt that the world record was within our grasp in the final stages of the race, we doubled down. We rowed 16-hour days each and broke 3 oars to achieve it. But there's a very big difference between winning and winning well. We hadn't set our rule book before we left. We hadn't spent the time understanding ourselves, each other, and where our boundaries lay. We hadn't really even explored our reasons for being there. We had no real basis as a team whatsoever. And unrealistic and unhelpful expectations were set and maintained with military precision, and perspective at times was completely lost. But worst of all for me was a complete lack of empathy and forgiveness. And we very quickly became a team of 2 plus 1. Accidentally kicking one of my crewmates while all 3 of us were wedged tightly in that cabin fast asleep was a terrible crime that I was persecuted for. My snacks were eaten while I was seasick, and I ran out of my supply with still 20 days of the road to go. I'd often lie in the cabin listening to one of them telling tales to the other. But the stonewalling was the worst. Being ignored, being looked straight past for no reason, while I sat on my rowing seat just a few inches away, staring confused into their faces. Displaying any sign of weakness or vulnerability was seen as being completely unnecessary by my teammates. And maintaining this robotic, emotionless state in the aftermath of near capsize or getting precariously close to vessels that were sometimes the size of the Empire State Building was like a badge of honor. So in the end, it wasn't the physical hardship that was the most difficult to bear. It was the emotional agony and deep loneliness of having to tolerate unreasonable behavior because you cannot allow conflict to escalate on a 24-foot boat in the middle of an ocean. Malcolm Gladwell says, we're social animals. It's not conflict that causes harm, it is neglect. And if we don't feel like we're part of something important, then what's the point? Casting someone out is a great sin. And our row had a really successful outcome on paper. We secured a new world record of 60 days, 17 hours and 6 minutes. We all survived to tell the tale. No one got badly injured or fell overboard, although I was tempted to throw myself in on a few occasions. And miraculously, nobody even wanted to quit. But if I have one regret, it's that we just didn't ask more difficult questions of ourselves and each other before we left, giving ourselves permission to share our insecurities, our fears, our vulnerabilities, and our authentic selves. Because without that, for me, it was the most bizarre experiment in unprecedented exposure to the raw state of the human condition when no one is watching. I'm just going to show you actually a short trailer. It's for a documentary that is currently out for commission.
It might sound dramatic, but there were honestly moments where I thought, this is such a scary, risky endeavour.
People that loved me, I put them through hell for 2 months. You know, anything can happen in the ocean.
We think you're nuts. We want you to come home in one piece.
It's exciting, but it's also extremely daunting. We are 3 women who have never rowed an ocean before.
We were just so naive to what was about to come.
I wanted to do this to face my fear of deep water.
If we get anything under 62 days, then we've got the world record.
We want women stepping outside of their boundaries and doing something that they wouldn't normally have done.
Describe yourself in 3 words.
Caring, daring, and fucking stinking.
We kind of feel like we have been handed out a load of bad luck.
Some of those waves felt like head-on collisions.
Oh my god, if I clipped that fucking hairpin one more time. If that wasn't alarms for how horrendous the journey was going to be then.
On the ocean, there's any number of things that can go awry.
The closest person to us was the astronauts in the space station.
Anything can happen.
It's one big shark. Oh my god, it's huge. Oh my god, it's under the boat. It's under the boat.
It's absolutely pitch black.
My bum is pretty sore. Everyone is sore.
I know 3 is a difficult number. There had been some tensions rising.
We had a massive row last night between me and Vic. She thinks I'm always having a go at it, and she also thinks I'm a bully.
For me, I think I got to a point where I felt so isolated, really, with the team dynamic as it was, and so homesick.
There's only the 3 of us that'll know truly what went on.
So on the evening that we finally tethered the boat to the dock in Waikiki and stepped off that tiny vessel that you just saw that had been our home for the last 2 months, the ability to reclaim my power and be free of the toxic supremacy of my teammates was the only thing that mattered. And in that single unsteady step, I had reclaimed my sense of self, my independence, and my ability to choose. And soon after I came home, I was recommended to read A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I don't know if any of you have read it. It documents his survival of Auschwitz. And in that book, he concludes that anything can be taken away from a man or a woman but one thing, the very last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose one's attitude in response to a given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So I'm going to circle back to this idea of emotional endurance, which for me lies at the heart of true resilience. And emotional endurance is not about shutting out pain. Emotions are not abstract responses. They're physical markers in our bodies. They're chemicals. They can't be ignored or flattened. Emotional endurance is about recognizing where our emotional boundaries lie and giving ourselves permission to feel those inevitable chemical responses if the boundaries may be infringed. Then giving ourselves time to find perspective in order to crucially let go of those feelings before they consume us. And it is not to say that we should tolerate emotionally damaging situations, but sometimes there's just no quick or easy way out. At times on that boat, when I felt so completely alone, I'd force myself to smile, reliving happy memories in tiny, minute detail. At night, I'd talk to the moon, imagining that my messages could be relayed back to the people at home that I loved and missed, and wondering if they were looking up in that moment and thinking of me. When it all got too much, I'd set my intentions every day for how I was going to show up and behave and respond, at times using extreme positivity as a sort of self-protective shield. And when it was all too much, I felt my eyes and throat burning up, I'd just sit and cry silently on the deck in the dark. I couldn't change my situation, but this was my way of owning and processing my responses. And I truly believe that if you can learn the skill of managing your emotions, you can get through nearly anything. But the row left me with a very deep sense of lost faith in teamwork. And I don't know if you've ever been in situations yourself where you look back and you feel like you've acted with integrity in line with your value systems, and yet you still have this nagging doubt or nagging feeling that perhaps you could have done more, you could have done something differently to affect another outcome. And I couldn't let that go. I ruminated on it often. Sometimes I still do. And as my reluctance to ever want to be in a team environment again festered and became a new subject of avoidance in my life, I just knew that I had to take that tried and tested approach of walking straight into that sense of discomfort one more time. So I recruited a friend, and together we embarked to run 250 kilometers through the Arctic, carrying everything that we needed to survive. Temperatures dropped as low as minus 35 degrees. It was an environment so unforgiving that you would get frostbite or hypothermia if you stopped moving for more than a matter of minutes. but that's a story for another time. Suffice to say, this time we prioritised our team ethos. We had a rule book. We talked about all the things that could go wrong, but we kept our focus only on the things that we could control. We pledged to always have perspective, to always look up, remind ourselves of our privilege of being in a very hostile but incredibly beautiful environment. We set out our routine. We had a body system where we put each other's needs ahead of our own. And we practiced the softer skills of how to listen, how to give and receive feedback, even how to have effective confrontation if it became necessary. We were not so afraid at the potential outcomes of these conversations that we simply chose not to have them at all. And we also allowed ourselves the time and the space to share our unbridled emotions that range from fear and exhaustion to relief and panic and everything in between. And we crossed the finish line in joint second place, knowing that we'd given it and each other absolutely everything that we had. And none of that post-race elation this time would have been so meaningful, of course, without the physical decline, the extreme cold, the sleep deprivation, but more than that, the way that we had chosen to face those hardships, the fact that we'd allowed them to be the things that would strengthen rather than diminish our resolve and our team spirit. So how does my story so far help you with facing your fears, with discovering your hidden capabilities, living better with pressure and dealing with, I'm afraid, inevitable emotional hardship in life when it comes? Well, firstly, if you know who you are and what you want, you can change direction in life. You can choose new rules and a different life, a life that you want. Secondly, perhaps it's about realizing that in the end, we only ever really have ourselves to rely on. And thirdly, it's knowing that pressure, walking into pressure, is both a privilege and an opportunity, because only in the presence of pressure do we see how far we can go. I'm going to take a risk and ask whether there's a story you've been told about who you are that may not be true, whether the life you have is the life you want. And I'm going to share one of my favourite quotes of all time by F. Scott Fitzgerald that goes, "For what it's worth, it's never too late to be whoever you want to be. There's no time limit. You can start whenever you want. And you can change or you can stay the same. There are no rules to this thing. You can make the best of it or the worst of it." I hope you see things that startle you. I hope you feel things you've never felt before. I hope you meet people who have a different point of view. I hope you live a life that you're proud of. And if you don't, I hope you have the courage to start again. And it's this perspective that inspires me to continue to build a life that I don't want to escape from. And perhaps you've already done that work. But if not, that's the first step. It's working out what a successful life looks like to you. It's defining your why. And our why is the thing that we give to the world. It's the value that we give to other people's lives. It's also the thing that we need the most in life. And Mark Twain famously said, the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. So I urge you to consider your personal purpose, to think about it, write it down, maybe share it with someone. Think about the reasons you get up in the morning, the reasons you do the job you do, the reasons you're going to keep going when life gets tough and you hit those inevitable pressure points. Because understanding what makes you you and defining what kind of life enables you to be that person will give you the necessary framework to make all the right decisions and avoid that awful decline into autopilot where we lose sight of who we are and why we're here. And if you find it difficult working out your personal purpose, I can highly recommend asking a friend, family member, or even a colleague to write you a letter. Imagine you were about to embark on your own ocean road for the next 60 days. What might they say about you to remind you of who you are and what you're capable of? Have you ever heard the phrase, other people are like the weather? No? Good. Because that's the title of the book that I'm currently writing, and I'd rather like to think it's original. But let me explain. In my admittedly rather unique experience, to discover that when you think you are completely alone, when you have no one else, you can rely on yourself. That's the ultimate goal. To know that you already have everything inside of you, not just to survive, but to thrive. To know that you can trust the power of your mind, trust the process, trust yourself. Lean, forgive me, the fuck in and feel all your feelings. Learn to love yourself for who you are. Because when you choose yourself first, when you believe in your worth without waiting for the approval of anyone else, I guarantee that is when you start to see changes happening in your life. And however much we might not like to hear it, in essence, we are always alone. No one else experiences the world the same way that we do. And it is ultimately up to us to draw on our inner resources, whether we're completely alone, in a close relationship, or as part of a broader team. Rowing the Pacific taught me that you can become utterly isolated in the closest, most confined environment imaginable. It taught me never to stop believing in or in taking back my power. And it reminded me that healthy relationships only truly exist if first, you believe in yourself. So if we can accept that other people, just like the weather, may bring sunshine, may bring dark clouds, they might be fleeting in our lives or they may settle. And that with every weather pattern that arrives, we can learn to adapt and grow and change and survive. And with an unshakable sense of self, we don't need to let them affect the essence of who we are or the trajectory of life that we may be on. People often ask me why I continue to take on these endeavors. What am I trying to prove? Well, I've learned that if I can continue to make positive, hard choices under the toil and fatigue and discomfort of my chosen endeavors, and more than that, potentially in the presence of difficult relationships with others, including myself, then I will find most of what life throws back at me in everyday existence more easily manageable, perhaps even trivial. And finding regular positive stressors to test our resilience forces us to try harder, to win or lose bigger, to feel all the feelings that life has to offer. Now, you might be sat there thinking, please don't tell me to take on any more pressure in my life. I already have enough to cope with. Thank you very much. The cynic in you might be wondering if this is a clever ploy by your bosses to engage me, to encourage you to simply work harder, to take on more load, to deliver better against, I'm sure, already very tough expectations. Well, it's not. In fact, I'm here to tell them that we all need to switch off more to switch back on. And let me remind you that muscles that are constantly switched on create dysfunction in our bodies, misalignment and compensatory movement patterns, and our minds are absolutely no different. We have to get better at reframing rest and recovery as part of our overall success and productivity. And however brutal it may have sounded to you as I described that shift rotation pattern of 3 hours on and 3 hours off on my row, that was of vital importance, because the only thing that allowed me to keep rowing for 60 days in a 24-hour cycle every 3 hours was the knowledge that I had 3 hours to rest. And any disruption to that very strict, time-boxed, reliable pattern had consequences, and not just physically, but mentally and emotionally too. But self-care is all too often the thing that we completely disregard. It's a thing that we might turn our attentions to when we feel like we're taking care of everything and everyone else in our lives, right? Well, I want to introduce you to the concept of fierce self-compassion. And fierce self-compassion is the self-discipline of self-care. It's when we stop seeing it as self-indulgence and start to see it as self-preservation instead. I want you to give yourselves and each other full permission to be fiercely self-compassionate, perhaps even unapologetically selfish at times, to be your own loudest cheerleader, to be your own most empathetic witness in life, to put on your seatbelt first, because no serious athlete would ever leave their recovery to chance any more than they would just magically expect their strength and endurance capabilities to improve without effort. And looking after ourselves, of course, means that we're better equipped to deal with challenge and pressure, It gives us a base of balance and stability in our lives that enable better vulnerability and for us to establish deeper connections with each other. It sends us a really important message that we're worthy of care and attention, and it undermines feelings of self-doubt and low self-esteem that can all too often act as a barrier to vulnerability. So that commitment to self-care, or fierce self-compassion, helps us cultivate the necessary resilience and self-awareness to be open with ourselves and with each other. And stress gets a bad name, but positive stress at times can be a really good thing. Only if you do it too long and without sufficient recovery will the load on the body become harmful. But positive stress, repeated often, allows us to enlarge our comfort zone and test and build our overall resilience, adaptability, and stress capacity. And you probably worked out by now that I'm not someone to advocate for yoga and spa days and social media detoxes, although those things may be helpful. Often the thing that we need the most is to go in pursuit of activities that will help us set better boundaries for ourselves, explore our capabilities and our limitations, reduce the negative talk that we often have in our heads, and get better at problem solving. So I've given you some of the theory, but how do we turn our intention into action and outcome? Well, we create momentum. And there is a fascinating neuroscience study from 2018 that shows that forward movement is associated with the suppression of the fear response in the brain and the activation of the confrontational and courage response. Momentum also triggers the release of dopamine in our bodies, which is the hormone that drives us to go out and look for things. So momentum literally reduces our anxiety at a basal level. Getting out and being active changes the function of the amygdala in the brain. And our brains are so smart. They play games with us, creating all sorts of layers and added padding as protection around a core fear, trying to divert us away from addressing it. And at the same time, locking us out of all the wonderful opportunities that may lie on the other side. And that fear becomes deeply embedded. It's paralyzing. We learn to limit our lives in response to that fear. The brain responds by increasing the level of self-protection even more, and sometimes even recreating emotional pain to keep us diverted away from the threat or the perceived threat. It's a really life-restricting cycle, and I know because I have been there. But we are far more in control of this than we think. So get smarter than your brain. Remember that you are not your thoughts. Bring your focus back to the small stuff, to the process. Create momentum from wherever you are. Go forwards, backwards, sideways, it doesn't matter. There's a great Zen monk phrase. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So be committed and consistent in the face of fear and pressure. Focus on the 1% that most people completely overlook, because those are the building blocks towards vital new experiences, towards change, and towards a path that will take you to your future self. I consider it a huge privilege to know how to thrive under pressure. A privilege to know from my own personal experience that when you think you've reached your limit, according to the Navy SEALs 40% rule, you still have 60% of your capabilities left. And knowledge that comes from personal experience is incredibly powerful. That's what allows us to step into the stuff that scares us the most, embracing the stress and the pressure and the hardship in all its forms. And you might think that the hardest things I've ever done are to row an ocean, to endure SAS interrogation, or to survive in the Arctic. But you'd be very wrong. The hardest things I've ever endured are difficult relationships with other people. Not having the love and understanding of my mother growing up, allowing myself to be defined by the limiting narrative of my ex-husband for 20 years, and then jumping right from the fire into the frying pan to spend 60 days at sea with 2 women who isolated me in subtle but very profound ways. And I've learnt not that my achievements as such lie in physical endeavour. for me is just the conduit. I've learnt that writing my own label, learning to rely on my inner strength and capabilities, managing my thoughts and my emotions, and trusting in the lessons that adversity delivers will take me to a whole other tier of comfort and contentment in life. I want to leave you with one final thing. It's an acronym, and the word is READY. And being ready is about trusting that there is opportunity out there and that we deserve it. It's about developing the necessary resilience to weather the storms that might seek to blow you off course. And it's being prepared for when that opportunity arrives and having the self-belief and resolve to exploit it. And let me just be clear, this isn't about chance. It's not about being in the right place at the right time. It's about deliberate, consistent, focused practice. It's employing an approach of general readiness and laying the foundations of possibility. I didn't grow up thinking one day I want to row the Pacific and then put in place the necessary steps to get there. One of the most common questions I'm asked about the SAS Who Dares Wins experience is how long it took me to prepare for that program. And my answer, without being facetious, is 15 years. The reality was I had 2 weeks' notice. So this is about building a base. Conscious, general preparedness. Think of it as your personal pension pot of potential. That's quite a mouthful. But by paying into it every day, you are setting yourself up for peak experiences, for subconscious enhancing events that raise your aspirations and your goals and allow you to see obstacles as opportunities for growth. So resolve to take the first step and remember that it's never too late to start. Embrace fear because it's opportunity in disguise. Ask difficult questions of yourselves and each other. It's far better to have those difficult conversations on dry land than in the middle of an ocean, because things will unravel at some point. And preparing for the worst really does bring out the best in all of us. Discipline is greater than talent, so master the mundane, thrive on that. And you can do more than you think. There's a secret 60% in all of us. I hope that sharing my story will help you to reframe some of the choices you might have in life. I hope that it will reassure you that inside of you, you already have everything that you need to adapt and thrive. I hope that it will inspire you maybe to go out and seek and embrace positive pressure a little more, and to see the things that often appear to be barriers are actually just doorways to a far richer life.